Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a review for Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This is an adult contemporary novel about a girl who was raped by a hockey player in a very hockey-centric small town in Sweden. The book follows the girl's family, and the town in the events leading up to the rape and the aftermath. I gave this book 3 stars. I did really want to love Fredrik Backman because there's so much hype for him, but this book didn't do it for me. I liked some aspects very much, but others just didn't work. To start with the positives, the world building in this was done so fantastically. And I know it is a contemporary novel, it's not fantasy, but the small town atmosphere was so palpable and I really enjoyed that. That was my favorite aspect of the book. I think he did a wonderful job crafting the small town, crafting the different people and their roles within the town. I love books where you get a real feel for the setting, and I think in this book, that was Beartown's strength. The setting was incredible. I also enjoyed the cast of characters and how they worked within the small town. It did feel very realistic and very interesting. All of them had very interesting stories that I enjoyed following. And I liked the story. The story was interesting. It held my attention. I was here from start to finish, and it was very easy to get through. Like, I never wanted to stop reading this book. I was never disinterested. I did really enjoy the story. However, where this book fell flat for me, and the reason it got 3 stars, because normally with all those positives, that sounds like a 4 or 5-star read. I didn't like Fredrik Backman's writing style at all. It was really hard for me to get through for that reason, even though I was interested in a lot of aspects of the story itself. The characters, the plot, the small town setting. That was all wonderful. It was his writing that got in the way for me. To start at the beginning, the very beginning, this book starts at the end. This book starts with one teenager in the forest putting a gun to another teenager's head and pulling the trigger. That's not a spoiler, that's literally the first page of this book. And then it says, this is the story of how we got there. And I really hate books that do that. That's such a lazy way to get your reader immediately interested in the story. And to be perfectly honest, that doesn't get me interested in the story. That makes me want to flip to the ending and see what happened and just get the answers that I'm looking for. Because I'm not interested in the characters or the story or any of how we got there. I'm just looking at the secret. To me, that turns the story into a secret rather than a narrative, and I get so bored of that. I really hated that he did that. Like, if he just started the story in the second chapter, everything would have been fine, and I would have enjoyed that beginning a whole lot more. That didn't ruin the book for me, but that was just such a sour note to start on, because I never like when books do that. It always feels like lazy writing. I also didn't like the omniscient narrator with the present tense. It felt so awkward to read, and I think it was just the present tense more than the omniscient narrator. Although I'm usually not the biggest fan of omniscient narrators in general, the present tense just felt stilted and awkward to read. I never liked it. It always just felt wrong in some way, and I honestly kept hoping throughout the book that he was going to accidentally slip into past tense. And I don't know if that's because this is a translation. Maybe it flows better in Swedish because this is a translated work. I can never tell with things like that whether it's the translated edition or whether it's the author's actual style. But I honestly just kept hoping he would accidentally change tense at some point and just tell the rest of the story like that, because that would have worked better for me, especially since we started at the ending in the beginning. We started from the very end, the very last point of the story, and then went back to the beginning, and it was weird that it was told in present tense for that reason, but it didn't work for me at all. And the storytelling itself felt so choppy. Like, every few paragraphs, every page or two, he would switch to another character's perspective. It is told in third-person omniscient, so it wasn't like we were in first person switching between characters, but you did get inside that character's head. And every few paragraphs, or sometimes every few pages, we would switch to a different character and follow their story for a few paragraphs, and then switch to another character, and switch to another character, and it felt so choppy. I don't understand why authors like telling stories like that. To me, it interrupts the flow, and I can never just relax into the story. That was a big issue I had with Salt to the Sea as well. And although it was less pronounced here, it bothered me less, probably because it was in third person rather than in first person. It still bothered me. It felt like an interruption to the story. And speaking of interruptions to the story, he kept talking about things that were going to happen in the future. And that irritated me. Partially because it was present tense, and it felt weird when we'd already started at the ending to begin with. And then he kept talking about things that would happen in the future. Like, in 10 years, she's going to look back on this moment and think about what she did wrong. In 10 years, one of them will be dead. In 10 years, this will happen. And it was like weird and unnecessary, and it felt like he was just interrupting the story to tell me things that didn't matter, that I didn't want to know yet. Like, none of it was spoilers. It never felt like I was being spoiled for this story. It just felt like I was being interrupted for the story. Like, if you've ever watched a TV show with someone who's already seen the whole thing before you and they're rewatching it with you to see you experience it, it kind of felt like that. Like, they would just point out, like, hey, you'll never guess where that storyline goes in another season, or I forgot she was so innocent, or just like small little details, none of which were spoilers. It was just, stop telling me these things. Like, I don't want to know these things. Let me read the story and I'll get there when I'll get there. And that was such a small thing. Like, it didn't do anything major for the story. It was just this minor annoyance that was always there, telling me things I didn't really want to know or didn't really need to know. I don't care if in 10 years one of these boys is going to be a father. Like, fine, like, wait for me to get 10 years in the future and then tell me. I'm not interested in that, and that was kind of how I felt. And then, finally, last point, it felt too obvious. Like, everything about this book was just incredibly obvious. Like, he needed to explicitly point out every single detail, every theme, every character who was supposed to be a good guy or that we were supposed to agree with or disagree with. It all just felt like he was spoon feeding me this information rather than letting me come to that conclusion on my own. I don't mind books with messages. Like, I love The Handmaid's Tale, and that has a very strong message. But it never felt like Margaret Atwood was spoon feeding me the information. She has an agenda, that's fine. This book had an agenda, that was fine. Rape is bad, that was pretty much what this book was saying. And it was a discussion on sports culture and the way that affected it. And I liked that. But at the same time, I didn't need to be explicitly told these things. I expect authors to let me come to conclusions on my own, and not treat me like I need my hand held throughout the entire story to understand what they're trying to say. And it just felt like Fredrik Backman was trying to hold my hand. Like, I'm an adult, I can figure that out on my own, thank you. And he wrote it like there was supposed to be a lot of nuance and a lot of shades of gray and, oh, well, this character isn't all bad or this character isn't all good. Like, we don't really know, there are no correct answers. But then he also wrote it in a way where you could draw a direct line and say, well, this character was in the right and that character was in the wrong. And there wasn't any nuance to it. And that sort of made it feel a little flat for me. I didn't like this book all that much. It was still good. I still enjoyed it, but it was the kind of good where I was like, I don't know how much I'd really recommend this. It wasn't that great. It reminded me a little bit of the Casual Vacancy, to be honest, except I thought the Casual Vacancy was so much better. I thought J.K. Rowling did a much better job with her characters and creating a cast of characters that was memorable, because for all that I really did enjoy the characters in this book, I forgot who they were a lot of the time because it felt like there were too many and it felt like they didn't all quite fit together neatly the same way they did in the Casual Vacancy. I couldn't quite remember everyone's name. He would reference someone, I can't remember who, but he would reference the coach of the hockey team at the end of the book and I would be like, wait, I don't recognize that name. Who is that person? And then I'd realize, like, oh, this is actually a major character of the story, and it just didn't work for me entirely. I do still plan to read the sequel of this book because I didn't think it was terrible, and I am kind of interested to see where the story goes. That was what I liked the most. The story and the setting were so well done. So I definitely will be reading the sequel. The only reason I haven't so far is honestly just because I haven't had the time to get to it yet, but I'm very much looking forward to that. And I do plan to try out more of Fredrik Backman just to see if this is what his writing style is like all the time. Because I do see why people really enjoy this book. I didn't think this was bad in any way. I thought it was quite good, just like 3-star good. It wasn't really up to 4-star quality for me, and that was disappointing to me just because of all the hype. But all in all, this was a fine book. I'm glad I read it, and I don't really regret picking this up. I kind of wish this was a new favorite for me, like I originally expected it to be. Let me know down below if you've read Beartown and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.